Hey everybody, we'll be starting in just a few seconds. Hold on there. Okay, give me just 1 second, everybody. Okay. Ready, Andrea?
I'm ready.
There you go. All right. I think we're getting a whole bunch of people in, which is great. So let's jump in. So welcome everyone. Let's imagine a world where your sustainability priorities don't live in a separate universe from your risk and compliance strategies. Today, we're breaking down walls, we're busting the silos and connecting the dots between ESG, GRC, and ERM. Because in today's world, resilience is a team sport. We're here because you know that aligning sustainability with your governance and risk frameworks isn't just smart, it's essential. So whether you're here to drive impact, stay ahead of regulation, or build a more resilient business, you're in the right place. So we have a couple of housekeeping items before we jump in. The webinar today and the content itself will last about 20 minutes, and then we'll run a Q&A session. If you do have any questions that you want to ask throughout the content, just plop it into the chat, and we may take the question at that time, or we'll hold it off for the Q&A section. And then we are recording today's webinar, and we will be distributing it to all the attendees at the close of the webinar as well. All right. So if you're not familiar with Socialsuite, we're an AI-driven sustainability risk management platform. We help companies to identify, manage, and monitor their ESG risks and impacts all through technology. So double materiality is a core part of what we do. We're backed by VCs like Salesforce Ventures, and we have over 100 customers all over the world that use our different products across a range of different industries. And as a reminder, if you go onto our website, we have a whole variety of different types of webinars, articles, a lot of different really high quality content that we've spent a ton of time building over the years. So feel free to go over there and don't miss the content that we have on a whole range of different ESG and sustainability driven topics. Now, unfortunately, today, Dr. Tim, due to unforeseen circumstance, he got really ill overnight, and he is not going to be able to make it to today's webinar. So we'll all be stuck with myself. I'm going to be the host, and I'll be running the slides and the content through the webinar. But we're very fortunate today to have Dr. Andrea Bonime-Blanc. And, you know, I met Andrea when we were at the Conference Board CSR Summit. She was a speaker and just blew me away. Incredible leader, thought leader, and expert in the area of risk and ERM. And I will be very open. I am not an expert on ERM, and that's why she's here. And so today we'll be really combining the expertise around sustainability and ESG with ERM and risk and bridging that gap today, which is really the theme of today's webinar. But overall, really excited to have her today. And thank you so much for joining, Andrea.
Thank you for having me, Seth. It's a pleasure. And I'm sorry Tim can't be with us, but maybe next time.
All right. So let's jump into today's content. Now, our focus today is really on three core areas. We'll start with the problem and really thinking about why does there exist these silos across sustainability and ESG teams and your GRC and ERM teams as well. And why does that even exist? How did we get there? We'll then move into bridging that gap and embedding sustainability with GRC and ERM frameworks. And finally, we'll move into different practical steps that can move teams forward and really help with that integration across these different areas of a business, across ESG, sustainability, ERM, and GRC. So starting with the problem, why do we have these silos in the first place? And breaking that down a bit and involving, thinking about the different practices around sustainability risks, one thing to start is sustainability itself. It's been, for many companies, they've been reporting for many, many years. Historically, it's been a voluntary effort, but we moved into this era from a voluntary reporting into mandatory reporting, which generally been driven from regulations. And we're starting to move beyond just reporting and disclosures and into really having companies that need to manage their real risks and opportunities. And so that's been a transition that's happening across companies all over the world. We're seeing more companies being more strategic, from climate, nature, and social issues that now that are and may be financially material. So that's a factor as well. We have regulations. So we have CSRD out of Europe. We have ISSB and IFRS, which is now, I think there's over 30 countries around the world that have different, either in proposal or have passed different types of IFRS, ISSB regulations. All of that demanding different types of double or financial materiality that are part of those regulations. And we're seeing a lot of companies really trying to still figure out internally, where do these different functions land? Sustainability, in my own experience, working with different customers, we've seen sustainability teams sit under legal teams. We see them sit under financial teams, sit under operations, EHS, really all over a company, which then creates other types of issues around creating those silos that we see today. And just moving beyond the fragmentation side, it's really trying to figure out how we can integrate these critical functions in the company. So Andrea, any comments on all these different topics here?
Absolutely. So I think we need to pan out a little bit and see the very big picture beyond what each company is doing and their various functions, whether they're working together or in silos, et cetera. I think we are at a point in time historically where the risks and the sustainability piece are so huge in terms of what's happening in the world, the climate change trends and megatrends, the issues having to do with technological change, the geopolitical change that's taking place. All these things are having dramatic effects on how a company operates in its footprint, geographically, functionally, et cetera, in terms of their products and services. So a company really, the company leadership, meaning the management, the C-suite, and of course the board, have a real obligation. They always had this obligation, but now they have a survive or die kind of obligation to understand those big megatrends. And all those big megatrends are full of risk and full of opportunity. And a lot of them are interlaced with sustainability issues. So climate, of course, and social impacts, of course, and all the governance things that take place, the ESG traditionally that we talk about. All of those things have become way more important, while at the same time we're seeing pushback, we're seeing polarization, we're seeing political games being played. And so we're kind of in a unique moment of great crisis and great opportunity. And I think the companies that are going to succeed and survive and thrive in this environment are the ones that are going to pay attention to how they're organized internally. Are there governance, risk, and compliance, or ERM and or sustainability / ESG teams talking to each other, coordinating, doing everything they need to do to share data, to share software platforms and approaches, to share reporting, whether they're publicly traded or privately held, in terms of their, kinds of reporting for sustainability versus the kinds of reporting for the regulators. Is that being coordinated, or is it in silos? And I think the companies that are going to have these groups doing their work in silos, not optimizing that interaction, integration, and commonality of reporting, those companies are not going to do well. And so I start with that very big picture. So it's really incumbent on the leaders and the boards to demand that from management, to demand that, and not only demand, but also incentivize their teams to do this kind of thing. And that's why I say it's incumbent on leaders to create the performance incentives, to create the other kinds of incentives, to coordinate the purchase and procurement of common tools and of common practices. So I start with that very big picture, because if you don't understand that very big picture and understand that it's a survival game, and it's also a game for great competitive advantage if you do it well. And so all of the things that you have on this slide, to me, are part of that picture, right? They're about, from reporting to risk. So sustainability has been around for a little while. Enterprise risk management hasn't been around much longer than that, nor has governance, risk, and compliance. These are all sort of teams of people that have evolved, sometimes organically in some companies, and other times more sort of suddenly an aha moment, oh, we have to have an enterprise risk management team or a GRC team. And so I think we're now at the point where these teams exist, and if they don't exist, they should exist, but they should exist in this coordinated way. So they have to be more strategic, as your point on this slide also talks about. And all of this regulation and all of the both voluntary and required reporting really demands that this kind of systematization takes place. And we are also in the dawn of an era of much greater tool capability through AI, Gen AI, et cetera. So I'll leave it at that for now, because I know you have a few more slides. So those are my thoughts for this particular moment.
Yeah, I know it's great points. And have you, one question on that is, on the regulation is rising, have you seen firsthand how the sustainability and climate regulations and the risks associated with them are driving companies to think and really prioritize ERM systems a bit more? Have you seen that?
Yeah, I think so. And it always goes back to, how large and or publicly traded or regulated is a particular company. And I always go back to the point of every company has its own footprint. It may have common things with other companies in its sector, et cetera, common types of requirements, regulatory reporting, et cetera. But at the end of the day, every company has a different footprint, and whether it's geographical, supply chain, personnel, talent, and it all is driven by the products and services that it's creating and its value proposition. But I would say that ERM continues to be something that companies either choose to do or not do. I'm shocked sometimes to see larger companies not have a systemic sort of ERM system in place, meaning a concerted effort within the company to identify risks, understand them, find ways of mitigating them, ways of reporting them, and then also ways of defining your appetite, your risk appetite, which is a really important piece of the puzzle as well. And sustainability has to be part of any enterprise risk management system. The sustainability risks have to be part of that. And that's where, the risk officer and the sustainability officer need to be good friends and talking to each other and collaborating and sharing tools and best practices.
Yeah, great points there. All right. And then, so now we're going to break down these different the silos within these different functions within an organization. And, thinking about, you have your companies have their finance team. Of course, the financial teams are there to manage capital, to do the financial statements, balance sheets, and ultimately ensure financial resilience. You have sustainability teams that are there to identify and manage the sustainability and ESG strategy, all the reporting, anything related to the environmental and social issues within the company. And then we have GRC and ERM, so governance, risk, compliance. So these are systems in place to ensure governance and controls, compliance, and ERM, enterprise risk management, really about identification and assessing company-wide risks. So one question I have for you, Andrea, when you think about GRC and ERM, sometimes they kind of get conflated and there's crossover and overlap. How do you really talk about the differences between the two?
That's a great question, and I think you answered it already by saying they kind of often conflated and mixed. And I think it goes back to, historically, has a company started a GRC program or has it started an ERM program? And I think if we break it down into its component parts, for example, GRC is governance, risk, and compliance, and that grew more out of the world of compliance, the world of more regulated companies that had multiple, thinking of banking, for example, or finance or healthcare, the companies that have multiple regulatory requirements that are foundational to their, to their social license. They have to comply with these laws because they're in the healthcare field or the financial field, whatever. And so having a way of systematically approaching your regulatory profile and making sure you're complying with all the things that need to be complied with was a very important driver for a lot of companies in those fields, I would say, to begin with. So they might have had a GRC sort of initiative earlier on because they were driven by that. And frequently that would be under the legal department. And I'm a former general counsel, so I remember the days where I was trying to figure these things out. What's not on this slide on the GRC side, although you do have the words ethical standards, is the whole world of ethics. And there's the ethics and compliance field, or the compliance and ethics field, that is also very intimately intertwined with the GRC piece. And at the same time, many companies developed an ethics and compliance program or approach separate from GRC and totally separate from ERM. So I think it's more, how did the company approach these issues and develop them, and what did they decide to do depending on their requirements and their needs? ERM, I see more as a systematic, more strategic approach to risk that a company has decided to do. And this is going to happen more often than not in the bigger, complex companies that may have a lot of regulatory issues, but they also understand that risk management is super important to their ability to operate in the world. And so those would be the more global companies, multinational companies that have geographical issues, they have geopolitical issues, they have all kinds of supply chain issues. And so you're going to find that more in those multinational companies that have been around for a while and have resources and budget, even if they don't really want to spend it on this kind of thing, but they know that they have these challenges. And so GRC I see more as maybe almost an American thing that came out of a regulatory world. And ERM is more of a multinational company, thoughtful sort of self-examination of we need to know our risks. We need to bucket them into big categories of risk, and then we have to create a phased approach to mitigating, understanding, developing controls, et cetera, et cetera.
Thank you.
Sure.
All right. So now we're going to move into bridging the gap, and how do we really bring these functions together? So breaking down GRC and ERM. So maybe, Andrea, if you want to cover this slide, like what really jumps out at you on the specific areas across scope, focus, users, orientation, approach, and tools around the two different functions of GRC and ERM?
Yeah, I think this actually reflects some of the things I just said, where GRC is more of a sort of a compliance set of tools, right? A set of looking at your profile from a governance, risk, and compliance standpoint. So it's more regulatory driven. And so you have the compliance, ethics, and governance folks more focused on this. The users will be compliance people. Audit, we didn't mention audit before, but audit is definitely a very important part of a GRC approach. And of course, IT and information security is always part of a lot of this too, in one way or another. And here it says orientation is rules and regulations, approach is operational and control driven. And then there's always a number of software options, platforms. With ERM, we're talking about that bigger picture thing that I was talking about a moment ago, a more systematic approach, systems thinking approach to what are our risks, and understanding, there are those grids that you have in risk management, likelihood and impact. And one of the simplistic ways that have been used over the years is this idea that if you know the likelihood and the impact, then you go to the upper right-hand quadrant of your matrix and you find the high impact, high likelihood risks, and those are the ones you need to pay attention to. That's not always true, and clearly, the information, data, and consideration that go into why this is on the upper right-hand quadrant of high impact, high likelihood is sometimes subjective. So that's where a lot of discussion takes place, and there are quantitative tools and qualitative tools to assess those things. But it is a way to sort of create some order in the chaos, right? Because we're all in chaos here. And so by just like the materiality, matrix that we put together in sustainability, we find that in the upper right-hand quadrant, we'll find the ones that are most important to the business and most important to stakeholders. So it's a similar kind of approach. But at the end of the day, you continue to need thoughtful human beings, not just AI and not just quantitative tools, to think about, are those really the ones? Or maybe they are, but there are others that are not in that quadrant, that if they accumulate over time, if you have, if let's say cyber risk isn't in that quadrant, but you have multiple locations with very loose cybersecurity, when you start having, multiple incidents taking place, maybe small ones to begin with, that can all come together into a really large cyber risk, because, one of the things with cyber risk is the weakest link in the chain will allow something really big to happen. So you can have it all battened down around your company, but at the end of the day, you need to really understand the cumulative effect of some of these things. So again, I think enterprise risk management has its downsides too, because we drive this sort of matrix approach, but we need to have much more thoughtfulness and this idea of strategic systemic import. And then how does that go up to your decision makers? So here the users, you have executives, board, and strategy teams, which is true. And I think, it should be tied to the business strategy. And one thing that's not on this slide that I would say is really important is that the enterprise risk management system identifies the risks, but it also identifies opportunities for value creation. So to me, that's a very important piece of the puzzle. And sustainability has always identified potential value creation and value streams and revenue streams and so on. So I think enterprise risk management has historically been more about risk, but it is also about value. And so sustainability and enterprise risk management have that in common, in my opinion.
All right. Moving into why do we operate in silos? So, a few key points here. I think historically there's been differences of culture, structure, different reporting challenges, different just general vocabularies. And I mean, look at materiality. There's material risk associated with corporate risk, and then you have material risks associated with sustainability, which are different issues, but also one and the same. So that can create some friction there. Lack of awareness and education, change management are always different potential areas of friction as well. We'll talk more about education in just a minute. And, certain lack of understanding and education at the executive suite, which are ultimately the ones that are designing and structuring organizations. So if they don't fully understand the differences of your sustainability team and the needs and objectives there versus your risk teams, that could also create certain silos and issues, which ultimately the executive team is accountable to create that overlapping and the communication across different functions. And so that's also an important area. And finally, the last one is on the sustainability side. For most companies, not all, but most companies, I would say outside of the Fortune 500 in particular, which are now subject to many of these compliance requirements, sustainability is very new. And most of them are in the first couple of years of reporting, just now starting to develop their own internal sustainability teams. And again, as we talked about earlier, they're still trying to figure out where even to put and what area of the company the sustainability teams should be put under. and then also how they should be communicating and integrating across the company. And that also has created a lot of these frictions as companies are trying to figure out where sustainability and ESG should be. But yeah, Andrea, what are your thoughts on some of these, the reasons for the siloed experiences that companies have?
My very simple answer to why silos, because human beings are territorial. And I spent 18 years in 4 companies as a senior executive, and I ended up overseeing a lot of these different functions. So I actually always saw sort of the interconnection, and I also wanted the interconnection. And I had, depending on the company that I worked for, I had supportive CEOs or not. And when you have the supportive tone from the top, both CEO and board, because the board has to require this of the CEO as well. When you have that supportive voice of, we have to work together, we need to incentivize the teams to do so, then it happens. But if we leave people to their own devices, unless they just happen to be simpatico and they talk to each other, you're going to have people saying, no, this is my jurisdiction, no, this is mine. And then there will be all these different battles that take place of, who am I reporting to? And should I be a chief of something or other? And should I be part of the C-suite or the executive team? And so it's the human characteristic that sometimes accounts for these short-sighted or more sort of territorial kinds of ways of looking at this. But we are living in a super, super complicated world that's getting more super complicated by the second. And so we're not working with each other and sharing data, tools, people, and understanding the risk aspects of a problem, the sustainability aspects of it, the value creation. If we're not doing that together in like a 360, we're not serving our shareholders, we're not serving our other stakeholders, and we're not serving the longevity of the company. And so to me, it's always about the right tone from the top. It has to start there. Because if the CEO or the board don't care or look the other way, or they think this is not really part of our business, they're missing out hugely, not only from a risk standpoint, but from these sustainability value creation standpoint. So that would be my general comment on this side.
Yeah, no, spot on there. It's so critical having C-suite and board for all areas of this, particularly even, let's take sustainability. If the C-suite and board aren't looking at it as a critical function in the company, it just doesn't get the resources it needs to be successful. And so that's a really important point.
And hence the greenwashing issue that we've all read about and experienced perhaps, where it's seen as a marketing issue, or it's seen as something to paint a pretty picture about the company, but it's not it's skin deep. It's not, there's nothing underneath the tip of the iceberg. It's hollow. And so the companies that fill that void with the right kinds of programs and incentives and projects, those are the ones that are going to survive in the long term.
Yeah. So now kind of moving into, what does breaking down these silos look like? And I think this is a really simple image of looking at a company. At the top, you have your strategic governance and committees across your board, your executive team, your audit and risk committees, your ESG and sustainability side. And I think a key point of the KPIs. One thing that we've seen as a best practice are the companies that run materiality assessments, and they identify their material issues, but they don't stop there. What they then do is develop work streams. They put accountability and ownership under each issue. They put an owner under each issue. They develop objectives, and they really see it through the company. And the ones that take those best practices are the ones that have much stronger programs. And so when you develop and you look at this down into the integrated risk and opportunity management, it's taking those concepts of ownership, accountability, work streams across all these functions, not just sustainability, integrating across sustainability, your enterprise risk, your GRC functions, and having them all work collaboratively. So, Andrea, in your perspective, what do you see as best practices? How do we break down these silos that may exist?
Well, I love the simplicity of this particular picture, because we can make this simple in the sense of looking at it from a very large, oversight kind of a standpoint. I think the way to do it, and I've done this in the past, and I've counseled people since then, since I've had my own business in the last 12 years. But when I was in the corporate world, and I had various different roles, sometimes general counsel, other times chief risk and corporate responsibility officer, other times I was the global chief ethics and compliance officer. Wherever I was always trying to do this business of connecting the dots. And the most successful way that I experienced was one of my companies, publicly traded, with a very decentralized global footprint, and Sarbanes-Oxley reporting, SOX reporting, obviously having to file quarterly and annual statements. We created a multidisciplinary integrated committee of about 14 people. And on that committee, we had some of the top people, like the CFO and the general counsel. And then we had, and myself and a couple of others. And then we had those business issue owners, like you said, accountability. So we had the person who was in charge of export controls and understood that really well. Someone who was anti-corruption, anti-bribery expert. And then we had a group of 14, and we would get together every 6 weeks. And this is a while back, this is before we had a lot of sophisticated tools and communications devices. This is about 14 years ago. But the point there is, we got together every 6 weeks or so to look at our enterprise risk management outputs, which we did every year. And then we just reevaluated them and that sort of thing. But we also integrated that with the Sarbanes-Oxley, with the SOX reporting. That would be the same in other countries for other kinds of public reporting. But the point is, the people that were either the decision makers or the experts were in the room at the same time, looking at data and looking at reporting. And then that would go up quarterly to the board. So you can do this. There just has to be a will to do it. And that has to come from the CEO, incentivizing those team members to do those things, whether they're the CFO and the general counsel, or those individual issue owners that run those particular programs.
All right. So moving into practical steps here as we kind of wrap up all these key points today. So there's 9 steps. There's a bunch here. We're not going to go through in detail into each one, but the main ones are, education. Everything starts with education, particularly at the top, and ensuring that your leaders understand the differences and the opportunities of ESG, sustainability, ERM, GRC, really key. Collaboration, and we talked a lot about that today, collaboration across stakeholders, collaboration across teams. Number 3, around cross-functional committees. Are these committees talking to each other? Are there core work streams and objectives across them? Number 4, around overlapping risks. So making sure that you're identifying the differences and the risks associated with sustainability and ESG versus particularly around ERM. In many cases, what we've seen is that there are overlapping risks, but then there's also differences. Mm-hmm. And so making sure you're highlighting them is really important. Having a risk register is key, and that's where you can have, whether it's frameworks or whether it's using software. Number 6, around joint accountability. Everything comes back to accountability. If there's not objectives and not ownership over these different issues, then that creates all sorts of challenges to create that alignment across functions. 7 is really around aligning your reporting and controls. 8, a unified materiality framework. Again, trying to think about materiality not only from an ESG perspective, but across the business. And then you have finally technology. So there's rapid shifts happening around technology, particularly around GRC, ERM, and ESG technologies these days with the advent of AI and new technologies. There are new platforms that can do all of these things, that could do integrated risk management, enterprise risk management, that can do GRC, EHS, and ESG and sustainability all together. And there's, of course, more siloed and purpose-fit technologies as well. So ensuring that your company is using the right type of technology that can bring all these functions together is also really important. So Andrea, in your point of view, we don't have to go through all 9, but are there any 1 or 2 in here that really stand out to you that are really important as part of these practical steps?
Absolutely. I go back to tone from the top and having the right tone from the top. And that includes the CEO and the board. If the CEO isn't doing it, the board has to hold that CEO accountable. And if the board isn't holding that CEO accountable, then all bets are off for this to happen. But so it has to start with that. And the tools in the toolkit for the CEO and the board for the rest of the organization are education, constant education, because we are having to learn new things all the time. So making sure we have access to it and do it. The interconnectedness of the different functions, the communication between the functions. And then finally, the accountability piece. Everybody needs to be held accountable and incentivized. It's carrot and stick. You need to be held accountable to achieve those results, but give people the right incentives, not the crazy incentives that we sometimes see to achieve sales or to achieve whatever. It's incentives that are measured and move people in the direction of getting things done. I'll just mention very briefly, when I was a general counsel of a power company, we had environmental health and safety goals and objectives, and I oversaw that team. And we had bought a bunch of dirty and dangerous power stations and distribution of electricity. And we were told to get those up to par. This was in other parts of the world, up to par with how we did things in the US. And they incentivized us with bonuses to get that done. And we got it done with a vengeance. So I think there are ways to align people and teams and make sure that they're talking to each other.
Spot on there. All right. So wrapping up. So let's move into Q&A. Bring up chat here. So, all right. So we have a couple of questions coming in. I got a couple that were sent directly to me. Can you go through a real world example of a single risk or opportunity that would be addressed by a chief sustainability or chief risk officer? What would it look like? And is it originating from a double materiality assessment, DMA?
I think what I just offered was a really great example of an environmental health and safety. So in this particular case, we had bought a bunch of generation power companies in parts of Latin America that were old government assets that they wanted to privatize. So we bought them and we inherited a bunch of dangerous, there were situations where people were dying because of lack of safety. And so we sent a bunch of people down there to do the gap analysis of what was going on. And then we addressed it directly. So this was a combination of both sustainability and risk. I was the general counsel, but I oversaw both risk and sustainability in that particular company. And so we were able to address that by bringing in the experts. They provided the reports. And so it became a huge reputational win for us because we had competitors, also American companies, that didn't invest in looking at the safety issues. And we had workers in that same location, I won't name names, who came to us asking us for jobs because they felt that they were safer with us than they were with the competitor. And so, it's maybe not a perfect example of this or answer to this question, but I think it's a granular kind of an example.
And I got another question. What are some helpful resources for building an ERM program? And I'll make a quick point of myself. We've engaged a lot of companies that don't have any ERM, that are planning on building an ERM. Like, how would they get started? Like, what should they do?
Great questions. So there's a couple of great risk associations out there that if you become a member, you have access to all kinds of risk resources. The Risk Association is one of them. Risk Management Association, RMA. So that's one easy, a way to learn what you need to do and then have access to a lot of resources. There's a friend of mine who's a guru in this space. James Lamb has written a couple of books on enterprise risk management, which are the go-to books. So if anybody wants to do that, go right for it. It's a great resource for anyone who wants to learn how to do this. And frankly, there's lots of resources out there. Ask ChatGPT to send you to the right locations to understand enterprise risk management. It will, I'm sure, dig up a few really good resources on the web. There's the Big Four do a lot of risk-related work that I think can be very helpful to learning about, risk management. So those would be some top-of-mind thoughts.
That's great. Thanks so much, Andrea. So we're going to now wrap up. Final slide here is, again, thank you everybody for joining. Thank you, Andrea, for coming on today. As a reminder, Socialsuite, if you're looking at sustainability risk management, at double materiality, financial materiality, compliance around your sustainability efforts, come to our website. There's different links if you want to learn more about our offerings and what we do. I'll end the call by saying, again, thanks so much for joining. This was a fantastic webinar, and your thought leadership on the subject really came out. And everyone on the call will be sending the recording soon after. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.